Zorian became a little concerned about things after the group disembarked at Scioria's main train station. This was because Brynn had a habit of following after them, and Zorian had plans that would be rather inconvenienced by that. He was just debating whether it was justified to use mind magic to nudge his thoughts in the right direction, when Brynn regretfully informed them that he had to stay behind at the station for a while. Apparently his parents were disturbed enough by the recent attack on the Novita mansion that they had asked a friend of theirs that lived in the city to pick Brynn up from the station and escort him to his dorm. Thus, Brynn would have to stay behind and wait for the man to show up. Zorian found it curious that Red Robe's attack on Zack had such far-reaching consequences. Brynn wasn't even from Scioria, yet the attack changed the way he went through the month so quickly and radically. Zack and Zorian knew that Tezzin and the city authorities would have a strong reaction to the Novita mansion being suddenly attacked like that, but he didn't expect the ordinary people to care so much. In any case, Zorian simply said goodbye to Brynn and Ivory and was on his merry way with Kiriel in tow. He did exchange contact methods with Brynn and Ivory in case they wanted to get in touch later, but he wasn't sure if anything would come out of that. Neither of them had been particularly inclined to seek him out when they had done similar things in the time loop. With the world lasting longer than a month, though, perhaps that would change. Only time would tell. Zorian didn't take Kiriel immediately towards Amaya's place, though. Instead, he took her to a familiar bridge in one of the city parks. There, a small black-haired girl was crying her eyes out over a bicycle that had fallen into the creek below. Kiriel watched quietly from the sidelines as Zorian slowly calmed Nochka down and got her to explain why she was crying. This done, he placed his hand over the bridge and telekinetically lifted the bike out of the water. He also casually cleaned it up a little, ignoring the chorus of complaints from his simulacrums that he was being frivolous in his mana use. The jerks had been on the lookout for something like this for a while now, most likely. "It isn't frivolous," he told them telepathically. "What did you expect me to do exactly? You could have waded in through the muddy water on foot," a simulacrum helpfully explained. "It's just getting a little wet, there's no harm in that," another one added. "All it would take is a bit more time." "Gods, why are you so impatient?" a third one scolded. "All of you, shut up and mind your own business," Zorian told them grumpily. He had the worst simulacrums. "There," Zorian told Nochka. "Your bike is clean, intact, and out of the creek. You can stop crying now, okay?" "Okay," she sniffed, rubbing her eyes. Thank you." "Well, if that's that, I guess we should get going now," Zorian said. "Though, I think it's going to rain soon. Do you have an umbrella?" "And no," she said, shaking her head. "But, I'm going to be fine." "We should help her get home," Kiriel suddenly said. She quickly got into Nochka's personal space and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Kiriel. Kiriel Kaczynski, and that's my brother Zorian. What's your name?" After some back and forth, Nochka agreed to have them accompany her home. The walk was a short one, but Zorian paid close attention to everything around him along the way. He found no evidence of cephalic rats or other invader agents along the way. Even the cephalic rat swarm he usually encountered while traveling through this part of the city was not here this time. He had chosen the path that led to Nochka on purpose, not because he was trying to avoid the rats. The Arania were fighting a pretty intense war with the cephalic rats at the moment, so this turn of events wasn't particularly surprising. They were too busy to spy on people much and could no longer move freely through most of the city. Still, while Ray and her family seemed free of invader schemes at the moment, he knew that wouldn't last forever. Assuming Red Robe did not find some kind of alternative method of unlocking Panaxeth's prison, shifter children like Nochka remained a critical component of Primordial's release plans. Thus, evacuating them out of the city through means fair or foul was probably the most certain way of sabotaging the ritual at Zack and Zorian's disposal. Shifters were not that numerous, and there were only so many shifters available in the area. Though if he were going to be honest with himself, wanting to befriend Ray and her family wasn't purely because of pragmatism. Ray had no special influence over her fellow shifters and would be of limited help if he wanted to talk them into going along with the evacuation. He just had a soft spot for the little girl that had befriended his little sister, and the sight of her stripped naked and waiting to be drained of all blood for some messed up blood ritual was vividly burned into his mind. He had promised to himself that he would make sure Nochka survived the month out there in the real world, and he still meant that. He meant to save all the shifter children, of course, but making sure Nochka was safe had a personal dimension for him. Since he had already thrown away his good sense and taken Kiriel to the death trap that was Saioria, he may as well introduce her to her former and future friend. At least if they started hanging around each other, he could more easily protect the both of them without spreading himself thin. The actual conversation with Ray was pretty mundane. Nachka's mother was pretty friendly, and Zorian did not confront her with any heavy topics. They simply talked about who he and Kiriel were, how they had met Nachka, and where they were staying. Kiriel almost ratted out Nachka on dropping her bike in the stream, which caused the little cat shifter to panic and hurriedly shut her up by manifesting her claws and clamping down on Kiriel's arm. This caused Ray to freak out because Nachka almost ruined their secret and hurt a guest. But the situation was thankfully resolved in the end, and Zorian pretended not to have noticed anything strange about the incident. Interestingly, Ray also brought up the news of Zack's place being attacked, just like Brynn did. She didn't have any new information for Zorian, but it did emphasize how notable the attack was for people. Zorian wondered if Red Robe even realized how eye-catching the whole thing would end up being. "You are classmates with the Novita heir?" Ray asked. I seem to have met an important person today." "Not really," Zorian said dubiously. "Come now, Mr. Kaczynski. You have a famous brother, you attend a prestigious magical academy, and one of your classmates is a scion of a noble house," Ray pointed out. "Two actually," said Zorian. "There was also Tinami. I don't think any of that makes me important." Ray hummed loudly at him, clearly not agreeing. "Have it your way," she shrugged. She rose from her seat and took a look at the weather outside. Things didn't look good, of course. The rain was pouring in thick sheets while the wind was blowing madly in all directions, and Zorian knew from the time loop that the storm wouldn't be ending anytime soon. This was the main reason Zorian was less impatient about leaving Ree's place this time around. He couldn't just teleport to Amaya's place or create a rain shield around himself and Kiriel. No, he would have to use an umbrella like a normal person, and they would end up wet and miserable by the time they actually reached their destination. He was in no hurry to experience that. "What horrid weather," Ray said, frowning. "I think you're going to have to remain here over the night." "We can't impose on you like that," Zorian said hurriedly, shaking his head. "We'll just slowly make our way through the storm. A little rain won't kill us." "You can't be serious," Ray said, giving him an annoyed look. "I know teenage boys can be a little reckless, and I would not have said anything if it was just you being stupid. But you're taking your little sister along, and you have to take this into account. Are you seriously thinking of taking her out there into that with just an umbrella?" Zorian stared at Ray for a few seconds before looking at Kiriel, who was sitting on the floor with Nachka. They were both whispering something to each other and pretending they weren't listening in on their conversation. "Kiriel," Zorian asked her slowly, "what do you think about going?" She fumbled, rubbing her hands awkwardly. "It's raining pretty hard." Zorian sighed, taking off his glasses and massaging the bridge of his nose. After a few seconds, he gave Ray an embarrassed look. He was just about to speak up, but she put a hand on his shoulder to stop him and simply nodded her head knowingly. "I'll go get some blankets," she said before wandering off to do just that. In the corner of his eye, he could see Nachka and Kiriel excitedly whisper to each other. They at least seemed pleased with this outcome. After a few seconds, Zorian clacked his tongue and decided to just roll with the situation. It was embarrassing, but there was no real harm in it. He looked through the window, silently observing the storm for a while. After a while, Ray wandered in and placed a steaming cup of tea on the windowsill beside him. Zorian gave her a curious look. "A cup of tea is necessary for proper rain watching," Ray explained to him. Thank you," Zorian said quietly. "Sorry for the imposition. I could tell it was going to rain, but... Do I look that mean and selfish to you?" Ray asked, raising her eyebrow at him. "Hospitality had always been important to my people." "Your people?" Zorian asked her curiously, feigning ignorance. "Your acting skills are decent, but I know you saw the claws on Nachka's fingers. You probably know what we are," Ray said, sipping slowly from her own cup of tea while standing beside him. "Yeah," Zorian admitted with a shrug. "It doesn't bother me." "Good," Ray said simply. She then dropped the subject and no longer pursued the matter. "I don't know if this is really the issue or if there is something deeper going on, but it's pointless to get angry or frustrated at a storm. It's a force of nature. There is no fighting that. You just take shelter and wait until it ends. Right?" said Zorian quietly, taking a sip of the tea Ray had made for him. Sadly, some storms couldn't be dodged that easily. Break. While Zorian had been escorting Kiriel, his simulacrums had been very busy. They, along with Zack's simulacrums, constantly attacked known cult leaders and invader bases, raiding them for funds and trying to decapitate their organizations. Sadly, this hadn't been nearly as effective as they had hoped. Red Robe had clearly been very busy and most of their targets had been forewarned they were coming. Warding schemes were changed, the guards were on alert, and some people were just outright evacuated to safety. They had managed to acquire a lot of money and resources, since many of the secret caches had been protected mainly by their secrecy, and it wasn't easy to strip a base of everything that was worth money in a hurry. But Zorian doubted they had managed to deal any kind of decisive strike to their enemies. Below the city, the fighting was also intense. It was mostly the Arania fighting the cephalic rats, but Zorian's simulacrum sometimes helped the Iranian side. And since Zorian's uncontested presence would have meant a decisive victory for the Arania, Red Robe's simulacrum was always there to stop the cephalic rats from getting wiped out. Neither Zorian nor Red Robe were fighting seriously, wary of showing the enemy too much and wasting their mana reserves. But the fact Zorian's simulacrum had a much more resilient golem body meant that he was slowly getting an upper hand in these skirmishes. It remained to be seen what Red Robe would do in response to that. Zorian doubted he would let the cephalic rats just die, since they were a critical asset for the invasion forces. The simulacrums were also negotiating with various Iranian webs in the region, trying to bring in additional support for the fight. Of particular importance were the negotiations with the Silent Doorway Adepts, since they needed their help to open a connection to Koth. Zorian did not doubt for a second the negotiations were going to succeed. They had lots of things they could tempt the Silent Doorway Adepts with. The Bakura Gate addresses in particular were bound to have irresistible allure for the web. However, the issue was that these negotiations would still end up taking time, and they had to keep the web protected from enemy machinations while they were in progress. Silver Lake knew exactly how important this was to them, so an attack at the Silent Doorway Adepts was worryingly plausible. Some things were also moved forward a little. Kale and his daughter had been contacted by Zack's simulacrum disguised as a school official, who teleported them directly to Amaya's place. This was mostly because Zack and Zorian were worried that Silver Lake, whose movements were still a mystery to them, was going to target them. Kale and his daughter were too easy of a target to be left alone for long. Thankfully, Kale did not suspect a thing and even praised the Academy for their thoughtfulness. Zorian intended to evacuate Kale to Koth once he opened the gate link there, but for now he was safest at Amaya's house, since that way he would be living under the same roof as Zorian and Kiriel. Meanwhile, the simulacrum that got Zorian in the whole trouble with Kiriel got a task to get his parents away from the house as soon as possible. Thus, less than an hour after Zorian and Kiriel had boarded the train to Cyoria, the simulacrum rounded up mother and father and teleported them to the port city of Luja. Their memory was modified to make them believe this was perfectly normal. It would create some discrepancies in dates. That could be a problem later. For now though, Zorian was just glad they would soon be out in the open ocean and out of danger. He'd deal with potential consequences of his decision later. The simulacrum in his room that was focusing on stabilizing his mana reserves was also evacuated out of the house, leaving it completely empty. Even if Red Robe decided to visit the place now, the most he could do was burn it down in frustration, which would still be devastating for mother and father, but Zorian was quite sure they wouldn't want to die to protect it. Overall, things had been going decently. There was still no sign of Silver Lake, and Red Robe was passively responding to their moves while focusing most of his energies into something they couldn't see. It made no sense to Zorian. The way he saw it, he and Zack had an absolute advantage in this conflict. Even if everything else failed, they could always inform the Eldamarian government about the invasion and it would be instant loss for Red Robe and Silver Lake. Any chance of successfully invading the city or freeing Panicseth would be gone. No matter how personally powerful they were or what clever plans they had, they could never take on the central government head-on and win. Thus, Red Robe and Silver Lake should have taken a far more aggressive stance against them by now. But there was nothing Zorian could do about that. All he and Zack could do was wait. Hopefully, by the time they recovered their full strength, they would uncover what their enemies were planning. Chapter 094. Ghosts. The next morning, Zorian and Kiriel bid Ray and her family goodbye and went to Amaya's place. Once there, they found out that Amaya had only been slightly worried for them. she had guessed from the severity of the last night's storm that they had taken shelter somewhere overnight. He also officially met Kale and his daughter. The Morlock boy was a bit more leery about him than Zorian remembered, but he supposed that was to be expected. He usually greeted Kale at Cyoria's train station and charmed him with practiced gestures and conversation right from the start. None of which had happened this time. Since the circumstances of their meeting differed, so did Kale's reaction to him. It was a minor matter, really. Zorian was confident that the Morlock boy would warm up to him eventually. If anything, the fact Kale was currently so distant may very well be a good thing. Much like Zorian's interaction with Ilsa earlier in the Resta. He froze suddenly, fiercely knocking his head with his fist a couple of times. No. Not restart. There was no time loop anymore. It was the real thing. He had to get this into his head as soon as possible. His strange actions prompted strange looks from Amaya, who asked him if he was all right. Once Kiriel had settled in and he cleared up some things with Amaya, Zorian left a simulacrum to guard the place and left to find Zack. He eventually found him sitting on the edge of the academy fountain, idly running his hand through the water while lost in thought. "It's weird," Zack told him when he approached. The fountain hadn't worked for years and it was only recently that it got fixed and repainted. But to me it looks perfectly normal as it is right now. In fact, I don't think I actually remember what the fountain looked like before this month. "Makes sense," Zorian shrugged. "It's been decades since you've last seen it." Even Zorian struggled to remember details like that, and his stay in the time loop had been far shorter than Zack's. He had the ability to flawlessly preserve important memories inside his memory packets, of course, but that only worked for select things he consciously deemed important. Most of his memories went through the exact same process as any other person's. Zack didn't say anything to that. Instead, he simply got up from his sitting spot and then motioned for Zorian to follow him. "I'm a bit hungry," Zack said. "Let's go to the cafeteria and see what they have to offer. It's been so long since I've been there I've already forgotten what the food there tastes like." "So did I," Zorian admitted. "Still, we stopped going there for a reason. The cafeteria food is nothing special, I assure you of that." "What's this all about, really?" "I don't know. It's just something that has been on my mind lately," Zack said with a shrug. "Say, did you ever figure out what you would do after this month?" Zorian hesitated for a few seconds. "There are so many uncertainties surrounding this month that it almost seems foolish to have any long-term plans until it's over," he said cautiously. "Even if we both survive and Cyoria isn't a ruined wreck by the end of it, the invasion may very well leave us on the run or trigger another round of Splinter Wars. Ignoring that, though, I think I'll just gather some funds." Zack gave him a knowing look. "Well, okay, a lot of funds," Zorian admitted. "And then I'll open a research facility to study the nature of mana. Maybe I'll be able to figure out how to duplicate that mana-increasing stabilization frame that you and Quata Kickle have attached to your soul. Or maybe I'll discover how to store mana in outside containers, assimilate mana more quickly and efficiently, or some other revolutionary improvement. That had kind of been my dream when I was younger. To invent something that would completely revolutionize the way magic is done. I eventually discarded that as a childish fantasy that I had no power to realize. But maybe it's not so impossible anymore." "Still very difficult," Zack noted. "If a talented mage with plenty of money was enough to revolutionize magic, it would happen way more often than it does." "It doesn't matter," Zorian said. "It's fine if I fail. I have no interest in hoarding money or in political maneuvering, so what else would I do with my time and money?" "Never say never," said Zack with a grin. "Once you get married, you may find your wife is not nearly as divorced from material concerns as you are. You're not even married yourself, so how would you know anything about that?" Zorian huffed. "Don't talk like an old man." "But I am an old man," Zack protested. "At least from a certain perspective. Anyway, I hope you realize that this sort of thing you're describing is something the time loop would have been absolutely perfect for, right?" "Yes, but I didn't have time to focus on such peripheral, highly theoretical projects back in the time loop." "Kind of funny but true. Life is amusing like that sometimes," Zorian shrugged. He paused for a moment thinking about something. "Of course, before I can throw myself into big projects like that, I first need to pay back all the people that helped me inside the time loop. Doing that without drawing any attention and revealing my identity is bound to be a tricky undertaking." "Can you even do that at this point?" Zack asked. "We lost most of the notebooks and research notes when the physical exit strategy failed. I saved the most crucial work in my head, and the rest can be reconstructed with some effort, Zorian said. It may take years, but I'm sure I can do it. He was deliberately being a little more optimistic about things than he really felt. So many things had been lost at the end of the time loop. It pained Zorian to even think of it. Zorian had used memory packets to preserve their most important information, designs, and notebooks before the group had made their exit attempt. Just in case. But this was still just a small part of the whole. It couldn't substitute for the vast body of knowledge and invention that the group had managed to gather in the end. Rebuilding that massive library and then handing down portions of it to various people without causing a massive stir that led straight back to him would be a difficult problem. Does that mean you've already given Kale his notes? Zack asked curiously. No, not yet, said Zorian, shaking his head. He actually had a fairly complete version of Kale's notes. He prioritized preserving his research, mostly due to them being old friends, so he didn't have to reconstruct much in that regard. The situation is very weird right now. I don't want to involve him in this mess until I have to, and I can't just hand him those research notes and leave him to his own devices. Do you even want to tell him about the time loop? Zack asked. Ideally, I'd like to keep everyone except Svim, Alanik, and the Cyaurian web in the dark about the time loop, Zorian said. I'm not sure how possible that is though. We are already planning to evacuate everyone we know to Koth at some point. We're going to need an explanation of some sort for that. At the very least, informing Daimen about things may be necessary to get his cooperation. Daimen would also be useful for his magical prowess and possibly his connections, Zack pointed out. Speaking of Koth, how are the negotiations with the Silent Doorway adepts going? Reasonably well, Zorian said. We haven't reached an agreement, but that's normal. I don't think we need to tell them anything about time travel. Gate keys for another continent are tempting enough on their own. We should have a way to Koth in a few days. Good. I'll feel a lot better with Princess by my side, Zack said. With her support, not even Quatakikal can force us to withdraw. I'd put my hand in the fire that Red Robe is trying to broker some kind of alliance with Quatakikal as quickly as he can. Probably, Zorian agreed. I really don't like this, Zack said. You at least are in constant contact with your simulacrums, but I don't have that luxury. I have no idea what's happening out there until my simulacrums deign to send me a report, so all I can do is wait. I feel useless and stupid. The simulacrums are doing fine, Zorian assured him. I'm concerned that we can't find any solid clues as to what Red Robe is really doing, but us being active along with our simulacrums would not have helped with that anyway. You may be right, but I'm sick of waiting, Zack told him. It just isn't my style, you know? Once we get our hands on the Imperial Orb and have Princess on our side, we'll be able to really go on the offensive. It doesn't matter what Red Robe is planning then, we'll just come straight at him and crush him in battle. If we demolish the Ibasan base beneath Cyoria and shut down the gate they used to transport their troops, the invasion is over. We'll see if he'll still hide behind simulacrums when that happens. Hey, Zorian. Hey, over here. They had barely stepped foot inside the cafeteria when a familiar voice started calling for him. It was Benasek, the chubby, cheerful, girl-obsessed boy that Zorian used to regularly interact with. Sadly, the time loop had not been kind to their friendship. Benasek could be really annoying and shallow, and the time loop had only made that worse. Eventually, Zorian stopped interacting with him at all. He kind of felt bad about that. Benasek had his faults, but so did his old self. He couldn't really ignore the boy's invitation without looking like a colossal jerk, so he reluctantly walked over. Zack followed after him, inviting himself along. Hello, Ben, Zorian said as he fetched a nearby chair and sat down next to him. Zack gave Ben a friendly wave and a smile before copying his action. You sound happy. Eager to start a new school year. You bet. Benasek said, grinning wildly. We're upperclassmen now. Our dating prospects have entered a whole new level. Hell yeah. Zack agreed, fist pumping in the air. For girls. For girls. Benasek agreed, returning the fist pump with one of his own. For God's sake, you two, we're in a public setting, Zorian complained, trying to ignore the way people around them were staring at them. So, you two are hanging out together now? Benasek asked curiously. When did that happen? In the last couple of days, Zorian told him. Don't ask. It's a long story involving a series of misunderstandings, me getting punched in the face at the train station, and Zack getting attacked by my little sister in retaliation. That sounds super interesting though, he protested. You can't tell me something like that and then just leave me hanging, man. He suddenly frowned a little, giving Zorian a weird look. Wait, are you saying you brought your annoying little sister along to Cyoria? He asked. Yup, Zorian confirmed with a decisive nod. Ouch, Benesek said with an exaggerated wince. My condolences. See, I told you that being so serious and responsible would eventually bite you in the ass. My family would never even think of letting me take care of my younger sisters. You should be more like me, Zorian. The mere idea is horrifying, Zorian told him bluntly. Bah, you don't know what's good for you, Benesek said. He gave Zack a speculative look. Though if you keep hanging out with our dear friend Zack, that may change after a while. I hear your recent life has been somewhat exciting. Oh yeah, downright explosive, agreed Zack. So that attack I was hearing about? Benesek asked. It's all true, but I was out drinking and dancing that night, so it ended up missing me, Zack said with a careless shrug. Haha, now that's the proper way to evade death, Benesek said, leaning forward to punch Zack in the shoulder. Zack blocked it, which Benesek took in stride. He leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more solemn all of a sudden. But man, I got to say, this is one messed up week. First the attack on Novita Mansion, and now that thing with the villages in Holakar. What is the world coming to? I really hope this isn't a prelude to war, you know? It's kind of selfish, but I want my academy days to be peaceful and fun. Zack and Zorian shared a confused look with each other. What do you mean villages in Holakar? Zorian asked him. We don't know anything about that. No, Benesek said, surprised. You two need to pay more attention to recent events, then. I know Eldamarian newspapers haven't reported much on it, but you two should keep an eye on continental news. One of you is the heir of a noble house and the other... Well, I know Zorian doesn't like hearing about his brother, but... Just tell us already, Zorian told his friend with a heavy sigh. Fine, but you have to tell me that long story you teased me with earlier, Benesek blackmailed. Deal, Zorian immediately agreed. He would make something up later. All right, Benesek grinned. I'll hold you to that. Anyway, word is going around that a number of villages in Holakar, that's the big neighboring country to the west of Eldamar, have been hit by some sort of attack recently. A weirdly brutal attack. Rumors are saying it was a total bloodbath with hundreds of people killed. Zorian's mood immediately plummeted. He supposed they finally got a clue as to what Red Robe had been doing all this time. Break. Later that day, Zorian returned to Amaya's place, his thoughts still on what Benesek had told them. He and Zack had immediately dispatched a pair of simulacrums to Holakar to check up on this situation, but it would take a while for them to reach the villages in question and investigate things. In the meantime, they could only speculate what Red Robe had been doing there and for what purpose. He didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to his musings, though, because he was soon interrupted by Taven, who sought him out for recruitment. Zorian didn't want to tell her about the time loop. Like Kale and a lot of other people that once made up their group of temporary loopers, she couldn't actually help them in any way, and telling her about the invasion would just expose her to danger. Well, more danger than she was already in. Sometimes he wondered if it wouldn't be easier to just tell everyone about the time loop and point the central government at Red Robe and the invaders right from the very start. However, when they had discussed that scenario back in the time loop, even the temporary loopers agreed this was a very unhappy solution to the problem. The central government was notoriously corrupt and power-hungry, and the current king favored a highly aggressive stance towards any internal threats. Once Eldamar's forces were done dealing with Red Robe and the Abasins, they were almost certainly going to turn on them. And anyone who knew about the time loop and the invasion would likely suffer along with them. Calling in the military was pretty much a guaranteed win for Cyoria and its citizens. However, they and people close to them might end up paying the price for this good deed. This was not a choice they wanted to make. They were not selfless angels after all. Thus, it was decided to only make the report once they were reasonably sure it couldn't be tracked down to them. That would take a while to set up, but it wouldn't take the entire month to do so. That was the main reason why Zorian was fine with Red Robe's stalling for time. Unless Red Robe blindsided them with something, Zack and Zorian were guaranteed to win. Of course, if Red Robe's schemes did blindside them, they would rather unmask themselves than allow the city to be destroyed and watch as an ancient godlike monster is released into the world. That was why it was important to keep most of the former temporary loopers in the dark for now. If the army suddenly stormed into the city and started asking questions, the less they knew about what was going on, the better. Still, he couldn't just refuse Taven's offer and send her off into the tunnels beneath the city to die. Thus, he let her in on some of his secrets. "What?" Taven complained. "Why are you staring at me like that? Is there something on my face?" She ran her hand over her face to check things and even glanced behind her to check if there was someone standing over her shoulder. Zorian didn't know whether she was faking it in order to make fun of him or if she honestly believed these were legitimate possibilities. But he supposed he had been staring at her for a little too long. "Taven, this job of yours is a total setup," he eventually told her. "You should stay away from this one." "Huh? What do you mean?" she asked, narrowing her eyes at him. "It's just a simple find and retrieve in the tunnels below the city. Fight some giant spiders, find the lost thingy, get out." "The giant spiders are Arania," Zorian told her. "They're giant, intelligent, telepathic spiders. Unless you know what you're doing and come prepared, they can blast you into unconsciousness before you can blink." Taven took a step back at the description, her eyes widening at the description. "Shit," she swore. "Roach, how do you— And that man isn't some innocent wanderer that lost his expensive trinket down there," Zorian continued. "He had been spying on the Arania and got caught in the act. That word breaker device is currently safely stored in the Arania treasury, not carelessly dropped in some dusty tunnel and free for the taking." "Roach, how do you know this?" Taven asked, a little more forcefully this time. "Huh. I'm surprised you didn't just accuse me of lying," he told her slowly. "This is too serious," she said, frowning. "I don't think you'd joke around with something like that. And you're not really the joking type either. Now tell." "Well, I know about this because I'm friendly with the Arania," Zorian told her. "They're teaching me how to control my telepathic powers after all." "Your telepathic powers?" she repeated slowly. "As in, mind reading?" "Among other things, yes." He sent her telepathically. She flinched back and gave him a frightened look afterward. For a moment Zorian thought she would bolt out of his room right then and there, but instead she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and forcibly calmed herself down. "Damn, Roach," she said, massaging her forehead. "You really know how to drop a secret on someone." "I had to make sure you take this seriously," Zorian said. "Well, you succeeded," she responded unhappily. She gave him a suspicious look. "You didn't read my mind without permission, did you? How long has this been going on anyway?" "I didn't," Zorian assured her. "I only found out about my innate mental powers recently." "Well, good," Taven said. "Though I'm not too happy you're keeping secrets like that. Especially something that sounds so shady. I never knew there was a colony of sapient spiders living beneath the city. They're not here legally, are they? And you're just hanging around them and learning mind magic from them like it's nothing? What else are you hiding from me?" "You're just mad I didn't invite you along for this shady adventure," Zorian said, deflecting her worries. "Yes, damn it," she said, swinging her fist at his shoulder. He flawlessly deflected her half-hearted punch to the side, causing her to stop and blink at him in surprise. His move wasn't really all that amazing, but he suddenly realized he never used to do that sort of thing before the time loop. "Oops. You know I'm right though," she said, ignoring the incident in favor of crossing her arms in front of her chest and staring down at him. "It's crazy dangerous what you're doing, and you should have at least taken a bodyguard when going down there." "You?" Zorian guessed. "Who else do you know that is an amazing battle mage?" she asked rhetorically, straightening her pose pridefully. "Well, I've been hanging out with Zach Novita lately and he's pretty good at combat magic," Zorian told her. "The Novita heir? Isn't he one of your classmates?" Taven asked dubiously. "Yes," Zorian confirmed. "A third-year student being able to compare with me? Please," Taven scoffed. "You're looking down way too much on me, Zorian. Looks like I'll have to challenge you to a proper fight soon, just to broaden your horizons and let you get some perspective on things." Zorian couldn't help it. He stopped himself from laughing out loud at her, but there was a wide smile stuck on his face that just wouldn't go away. "What?" she demanded. "What the hell is so amusing about what I said? You want to fight right now?" He couldn't help it and simply burst into laughter at her. Later on, Zorian reflected that Amaya was probably starting to think of him as some major weirdo. First it was that incident of him punching himself in the head earlier, And now there was a girl chasing him around the house and demanding that he takes it like a man, and whatnot. Zorian wasn't sure how his friendship with Taven was going to fare in the future, considering that he could not possibly hide the full extent of his skills forever. But at least her current visit had brightened his day somewhat. Break. Red Robe had chosen his targets well. Although situated on the border of Aldemar and relatively close to Cyoria, Holakir was pretty difficult to access. It had rather unfriendly relations with Aldemar. Not an unusual situation in regards to states bordering their country. And it was a mountainous country with poor transport infrastructure and plenty of isolated mountain villages. Reaching their destination was quite mana expensive, requiring lots of teleportation and other magic, and orienting themselves was a chore. The whole region was swarming with Holokorian soldiers searching for the culprits and trying to control the flow of news and people in and out of the place. Additionally, Holakir's cartographers had apparently not done a very good job, because some of the villages hit by the attacks weren't even marked in publicly available maps and records. Still, Zack and Zorian were resourceful people and their simulacrums inherited their skills. Thus, it took them less than 2 days to reach the villages Benesek had told them about and investigate the situation. The results of the investigation were grim. Benesek had said the worst of the rumors mentioned hundreds of casualties. But it only took one glance at the first village they visited to realize this estimate was, if anything, severely understated. The village was the scene of a total bloodbath. Of the 300 or so inhabitants, most of them had been killed. Only a young couple that sneaked away from the village during the night and an old hunter that decided to sleep over in the wilderness had survived the slaughter. The attackers hadn't even bothered to loot the place. The objective appeared to have been simple, indiscriminate killing. The other villages they visited were pretty much the same. A sudden, overwhelming attack that aimed to kill as many as possible. Accounts of the attackers were hard to come by since most people who got caught up in it died, but it was clear the attacker was a sizable armed group. A group that contained war trolls, various monsters, and scores of undead. A group that seemed capable of teleporting themselves all over the place, because they had hit over 10 villages in the span of a single night, before seemingly disappearing into thin air. Adding everything together, Zack and Zorian estimated the death toll reached easily into thousands. Holokorian authorities had walled off the area from the rest of the country, fearing mass panic and unrest if the true scope of the slaughter became known, which was why the reaction to the attack was rather muted at the moment. Still, those kinds of measures were just stalling for time. Zorian would be surprised if they could keep it a secret for more than a week. At first, neither Zack nor Zorian could understand this move. What was Red Robe trying to accomplish by killing Holokorian villagers like that? Was this some sort of large-scale sacrifice? Zorian wouldn't call himself an expert on blood magic, but he didn't think so. The killing was too quick and disorganized, and the villages hit by the attacks weren't arranged into discernible pattern. In the end, they went to Alanik for help. Alanik was one of the people they had decided to inform about the existence of the time loop and the invasion no matter what, since he was highly competent and already in huge danger from the invaders no matter what. Thus far, he still wasn't convinced they were telling the truth about the whole time travel business, but the information they had brought him was pretty convincing on its own. After all, the little notebook that Zorian duplicated from his memory packets was written by Alanik himself, and listed all sorts of criminal groups and hideouts they had found over the restarts. Even if Alanik thought they were lying or delusional about being time travelers, he was still holding a book written in his own handwriting, mentioning things only he should know about and listing a variety of things whose truthfulness was easy to check. Alanik took one look at the information they had compiled about the attack on Holokorian villages and dismissed the idea it was some kind of massive demon summoning or some other piece of blood magic. Blood magic-fueled summonings are disturbingly easy, but not this easy, Alanik said, shaking his head. The victims would have to be herded into a central location. Their life force would have to be carefully mixed and funneled into a massive spell formula circle. The preparations would not be small and would be easily noticed and stopped. Holakir's authorities would not miss such a thing, and you would have seen evidence of it even if they had. Then what is this about? Asked Zack, sounding frustrated. Why are they killing all these people? It's not simply bloodthirstiness, I'm sure of that. This was clearly done with the full cooperation of Quata Kikl and his forces. There is no way he would have agreed to this unless there was some kind of clear benefit to this. Alanik looked at the papers in silence, shuffling them around while frowning deeply. This went on for a full minute, with Zack and Zorian quietly waiting to hear what he had to say. I almost want to say this is a soul-gathering operation, Olenek eventually told them. Except, gathering souls is not such a simple business either. In order to gather the souls of thousands of people, the attackers would need thousands of soul containers. Even if they could afford to build that many, the sheer logistics of shuffling those soul containers around to the right place in the right time and casting the necessary spells to capture the soul before it moved on to the afterlife. Zack and Zorian's faces became uglier the longer Olenek continued to speak. Shit, Zack swore. What? Olenek said, frowning. He was frowning a lot at the moment, clearly upset by the information the two of them just brought him. They don't have to go through all that trouble because they have Sudamir's Well of Souls, Zorian explained to him. Well of Souls. Olenek slowly repeated. He glanced at the little book on the side of the table. Is that inside the notebook you gave me? It is, Zorian confirmed. You must not have reached that part. Olenek quickly flipped through it until he reached the relevant part. Zack and Zorian waited for him to finish, discussing things quietly amongst themselves. Well, Olenek eventually said, snapping the book in his hands shut. Not only am I now certain this was indeed a soul-gathering operation, I think I even know what they need all those souls for. Yes. And so do we, Zack told him grimly. It's pretty obvious at this point. Sudamir is making his wraith bombs in advance, Zorian finished for them. Break. Despite recent developments, Zack and Zorian decided to attend the first day of classes at the academy. There were 3 reasons for that. The first one was that Zack and Zorian wanted to scout out Ayaska Mansion to see what they were dealing with before they committed themselves to anything substantial. The second one was that they should get access to Koth soon, which will greatly expand their capabilities and was well worth waiting for. And the third one was that showing up to class today was probably their last chance to do such a thing for the rest of the month. After today, it was unlikely they would have time to mess around with schoolwork and attending classes. They might as well take this opportunity to reunite with their classmates for a moment, finish recovering and mentally prepare themselves for the trials ahead. You're late. Zorian looked at Akoja, dutifully standing in front of the door with a clipboard in her hands and taking note of incoming students. She stared at him coolly, tapping her foot impatiently against the ground. He simply smiled at her in response, causing her to suddenly lose her cool and look away uncomfortably. Sorry, Zorian told her. Things are a little hectic these days, at least for me. Well, just don't let it happen in the future, okay? She told him seriously, quickly recovering her confidence. Sadly, I don't think that's possible, Zorian shook his head. I'm probably going to be absent from classes a lot in the near future. It's not a good idea to miss the start of the school year like that, she told him with a small frown. I disagree. The start of the school year is the best time to miss, Zorian told her. It's all just repetition of things we've already learned in previous years and very easy study material. I'll make up for it in a flash, you'll see. Just get inside already, she told him with a long-suffering sigh. Zorian gave her a thumbs up and did as he was told, humming happily as he entered the classroom and picked a seat for himself. Zack was already inside, Akoja not having paid too much attention to him. Zorian greeted a few of the classmates he remembered being slightly more friendly with before the time loop, turning some heads due to how uncharacteristically happy he seemed, before going towards the front of the classroom. He picked a familiar spot next to Briam and his fire drake, with Zack right behind him. Just like he expected, the small fire drake in Briam's lap immediately started hissing at him when he approached. Briam quickly enclosed the orange-red lizard with both hands and started whispering soothingly at his familiar. The drake calmed down a little but still kept both of his eyes on Zorian, alert and nervous. Zorian ignored the spectacle, simply plopping down on his seat and calmly watching the scene. He still didn't understand what exactly the fire drake found so upsetting about him in particular. He had once even peered into the fire drake's mind to find the answer, but that didn't help. The fire drake was not actually a sapient being. He was a creature of instinct, and something deep inside of him told him that Zorian was uniquely dangerous out of all people gathered in the classroom. The fire drake did not understand why, but it trusted its instincts. Did the drake sense Zorian's mental powers, despite not being psychic himself? Did Zorian have some ability he had no idea about? It was a mystery. From what Briam had told him, he wasn't unique in this regard. Fire drakes could be very strange, temperamental creatures, and he wasn't the first person that his familiar had picked out for some reason. Eventually, the influence of the mage they were bonded with tended to temper these kinds of aggressive urges, and mature fire drake familiars were apparently far more placid and reliable in dealing with strangers. "Sorry about that," Briam said. He's still a little uneasy around strangers. "Don't worry about it," Zorian said, waving the apology away. "Congratulations on getting your own familiar, I guess. Must be a milestone for you." "Yeah," Briam said happily, patting the drake like some kind of scaly cat. The drake reacted to that sort of like a cat too. "It's great." He spent some time talking to Briam and waiting for the class to start. Though it was premature to worry about that now, he couldn't help but wonder how to deal with school life in the future. His classmates were nice and all. Some of them he'd be happy to befriend if possible. But he was so much more capable than them magic-wise that it wasn't even funny. Plus, the classes themselves are bound to be mind-numbingly boring. Could he really pretend to be just a normal student for 2 years straight? Was it actually possible for someone like him, a guy with archmage-level skills and a decade of additional memories and experience under his belt, to befriend one of these people? Perhaps Time Loop Taven was right and his attempt to connect to his former friends and classmates was ultimately kind of hollow and patronizing. Thankfully, his somewhat depressing thoughts were soon interrupted by Ilsa's arrival to class. She did her practice speech at the beginning of the class and then started the lesson. Zorian was already preparing himself for a boring but relaxing class, the likes of which he had heard dozens of times inside the time loop, when the classroom door suddenly burst open, and a teenage boy his own age swaggered inside. That he was tall, with messy blonde hair and rumpled clothes that looked like they had seen better days. The door had been opened so forcefully that Zorian suspected the boy had kicked it open with his foot instead of using the handle. It rebounded against the wall with a loud bang and promptly closed itself behind him. As he marched forward towards the front of the class, the boy swept the whole class with his gaze. For a moment, Zorian met his eyes and found himself staring at vividly orange eyes, their slitted pupils burning with barely contained anger and aggression. Veyers Boranova had arrived to class.